So I think we usually think about like fucking around and finding out as like the thing that you do before you figure shit out. But I actually have that reversed, which is I think it's the thing that you do once you have figured some like central shit out. And I wanted to start today a little bit by like giving all of you this very short, compressed encapsulation of this body of work. Because I know that all of you have kind of come at it from different places, and different people have different pieces of the orientation, and it's probably somewhat incomplete for everybody because it's so big that even if you have watched a lot of the recordings that are in the resource library, there's still just pieces of it that you're missing. And most of what I talk about is about kind of the most juicy middle point of this thing, because that's where we are encountering the most uncertainty around what we're doing, where we're going, how the field is moving, and what is the dance with like control and the adaptive body. So I'll say that at the beginning, the most important part that I present is this widespread, overarching, what I call corrective lens. Everybody in this society, no matter what practice you have been engaged in, no matter what your origin or contact with in life, both spiritual, psychological, physiological, healing, resolving, attaining, everybody has encountered traditions, methods, and practices that what I have found over time are only giving you kind of a slice of the bigger picture. They may point to the thing, but many of them that are more complete, like really ancient systems, what they're missing is how those systems dance in today's world. Because those systems were never really designed for us to be in this massively widespread oppressive body. No one knew that that was, well, maybe the Mayans predicted it, I don't know. But you know what I mean. Like, some ancestors might be slapping me right now. But like, I'm not certain that like anybody really knew that it was going to get this magnitude of fucked up. So, so I think what's happening with those ancient systems is that we can take pieces of them and we can apply them to now. But what we find is that even the practices seem to not help us understand as completely what's happening and how to dance with it. And what we're really dancing with in the now is this massive body that has accumulated over time, and in that accumulation has collected a ton of power and influence within and over every system that we interact with, including our own bodies. And so, as a result of that um, accumulation, what we're finding is that we all live in this kind of general state of partial colonization. And that this colonization is like sticky and sometimes invisible, and oftentimes feels unchangeable, because the nature of this thing is that it has the structure of the double bind. And whenever we come close to the structure of the double bind, what we find is that it like warns us, back off, because you can't do anything with this. And so we kind of retreat into a semi-helpless or fully helpless state that I refer to as partial or full collapse. And what we do is we just organize our lives outside of those double binds, or in adaptation to their presence. We work around them. And our energy bodies work around them. And there's a piece of that that for a while can often be okay, until we get to the place when we recognize that those workarounds are, number one, costing us, and number two, making us feel incongruent and dishonest. And that is usually the threshold at which we go to look for like help. We're like, okay, now let me find a spiritual practice. Let me find a teacher. Let me find like a psychologist. Let me find some damn medication, something that is going to help me with this thing that feels unchangeable, that not only lives in me, but lives everywhere. And so, because of it, we have accepted it as a kind of bottom. It's like we've come to regard it as a threshold that like is just what it is. Like, this is just how it is. And even when we question it intellectually or in our somatic bodies, we still feel this experience of like we're up against something so epic that the best that we can do is just negotiate with ourselves to deal with it. And what that has created is incredibly widespread depression and widespread anxiety. And those also are so baseline that we have come to not even think about those things as depression and anxiety. Once you're a bit outside of them, what you encounter is that every interaction you have with people, it's like, holy shit, those people are so fucking anxious. And like, they don't know how to play. And that's true, but it's really not even a conscious anxiety or an inability to play. It's a holding pattern. It's an old, freezed up holding pattern that has gotten reinforced over so much time that the body of the freeze, which is actually happening in all the bodies, now doesn't even remember what it is to experience its own movement. So let's say everything I just said is how you come to a model. Most models are going to give you one or two bypasses or both. One is going to go above it. It's going to be like, let's transcend this. And almost everybody who comes to me has had some flavor of experience with that. Sometimes that's just dissociation, right? Sometimes that's spiritual practice. Sometimes that's just like a lifetime of dissociation. And if you are shamanically inclined, if you have a strong dream body, if you have a strong imaginal practice, it is very easy to dissociate into those places and it not even feel like dissociation, because it's basically just like, this is a place I'm trying to find an answer. I'm trying to find a way. That's what I mean about dissociation. Less in its pejorative view is the way I'm speaking about it. And then the other way is, I'm going to go get some therapy for this, or like go do a circling thing, or find a group to talk to, or whatever, a processing thing. And that usually takes you down the rabbit hole of like, okay, I'm going to like talk about how my childhood was evil, or how actually my childhood was fine, and why am I stuck with this, and there must be something wrong with me, or some combination of the alchemy of all of those things, as you guys know. And I'll say that both of those methods, they do something. So it isn't in any way like those methods are worthless. It's just that both of them are doing something different for what I call the preparation phase. And the problem is, in this time, everything that we're marketed with and to is really about that preparation phase. Very little deals with what happens after that, or even is there an after that, the elusive after that that we're always preparing for 65 lifetimes. So it's like this model, I'm not going to call it a model anymore. This view actually looks at where it's leading and then backpedals that thing. It reverse engineers it to the beginning of the thing so that the complete view is not just found at the end, but from the start. And what that does is it deeply informs your ability and power to navigate wherever you are in that long, ever changing, forever middle place. Because to a certain degree, we're never not in the middle place. We are always attaining, we are always metabolizing, we are always evolving, and we are always stagnating. And we are phasic in nature. And so each phase might have different amounts of what I just named, but they're still just phases. Unless one phase or several feel like they go on forever. And if you find yourself there, what you find yourself in is where the world is right now, which is what I call a chronic condition. It's where what should be a phase, even if it could be a long one, has become absolutely away. And that's because that phase cannot pass through the elusive double bind threshold. It cannot pass through certain scaffolding that it has regarded as permanent. I want to say something else too about those partial view systems, which is that in a partial view system, one of the hallmarks is that it does not significantly decrease shame or fear. If either or both of those two things are not significantly tackled in a view, a method, and a system, you actually will stay just where you are no matter how much attainment that you take in. So they have to be able to account for that. And the best way to account for that is to recognize that neither of those things are personal. They have both been used in collective oppression. Shame is one of the major tools of collective oppression. It's not personal to you. And it is its own body, in the same way that fear has its own body. Now, it's normal, we are animal beings, and it's very normal to have fear reactions. But the amount of fear that we live with is deeply abnormal. And that's partially because the amount of exposure to everyday violence is abnormal. Micro-violence. And it has become so widespread that we have this fear body now that is almost always ready to be in reaction. And you don't have to have major trauma for that to be true. And in fact, it's easier in some ways to heal the major trauma than it is to heal what I'm speaking about. Because those pieces don't scream as loud, and so they're more invisible to us. They are just pollinating our system. So I want to say all of this to blanket the field with some degree of normalization and decrease in inflammation for everybody who is listening to this. Because the systems that we have not only not decreased inflammation, but they have increased it in many, many ways. It's not to say that they don't have something, but they don't understand widespread oppressive systemic inflammation. They're treating it like a thing, not a response. It is a response. It's a rightful response. So once you have that landscape, what happens is that everything you've done before now begins to click in this different way. And you can then begin to see, oh, that's why I felt that way with that, because it didn't include these other 5 variables. And those were really important. Or this piece that I did over here can connect to this piece that I did over here. And they actually could have some synergy together and could give me more bang for the buck or more power in their connection. So what this does is give you a view that allows you to use any method, any system, any medicine within a framework that will help you apply it in the right way or closer to the right way. So let's say all that happens, and then you're like, okay, here I am on the journey, I'm doing the thing. And then, of course, as you're going along on the journey doing the thing, you're encountering the response to your life through this lens of many variable bodies. But the primary two that you guys know I talk about is the adaptive body and the emergent field. And what happens over time, ideally, is that you keep moving from all of your energy or most of your energy being anchored in the adaptive body as a way into the emergent field as the primary responsive generative movement of your being. And that requires no effort. That's the thing. You don't have to try for that at all. And you don't have to cultivate it because you already have it. It's just that it's like everybody has turned your attention for 500 generations this way. And so I'm basically saying, okay, we've been looking this way, look this way. And what happens when you begin to look this way is that instead of your looking being this narrow, it becomes this wide. And when your looking becomes wider, the next thing that happens is you start to get to choose where you put yourself in that scene. Because when your looking was this narrowed, you only had one position. Keep from drowning. Scarcity, survival, me, victim. Those are qualities of that one position in chronicity. When the view gets wider and you can move yourself around in the landscape, now not only do you have choice, but suddenly your perception starts changing. And when your perception starts changing, now you can play. And that is the real threshold beginning of what I say is entering the next phase, which is really how you get to move from cultivating some degree of freedom, which you do by collapsing obstacles, collapsing dishonesty, collapsing walls, which opens more honesty. Once you've gotten to that part and you can start moving around, now you can start playing with what's here. And that has its own set of problems. It's like, oh, I get a free pass now. Because the thing is, what's here is really not that fantastic. Because it's so formulaic and so born from narrow anxiety that what it's offering you is like what I call the low fat cheese. And so when you've gotten to the place where you've like cultivated your appetite again, and your appetite is fully online, you're like, who the hell is selling this shit cheese? And so then you have to go figure out how you're going to like basically create your own path for the better cheese with basically the shitty ingredients, right? And so this is another place where people tend to like get really depressed. I got really depressed there for a while. It was like I did all this shit and now I'm here. Yeah, cheese alchemy, exactly. I did all this shit and now I'm here and hello, no one's here with me. First of all, who the fuck tells you that you should do all that crap and eat all that, like literally the contents of the garbage can in the universe? And then after that, when you finally had arrived at the place where you're like glowing, you're like looking around and everybody else is not only not eating the garbage, but they think the garbage is good. And so I had a whole period there where I was like, oh, this is very, very bad. Somebody sold me a bill of goods. This is very, very bad. And I had to go, through the whole grief process like several hundred times in order to get myself out of there. And then once that happens, there's a whole other alchemy that begins to happen. But my point is that, like, the welcome here in this space of the center and the welcome here with this work is both to correct view and also to support you guys in the million permutations of things that happen in that whole body of time, which is not in time either, but that whole body of metabolism and attainment that is what our spiritual practice is. And that thing involves every body of our being. It doesn't leave out your financial situation. It doesn't leave out your sex life. It doesn't leave out your physical body, your nutrition. Yeah, be the Bree you want to see in the world. That's it. Let's use that as a tagline, t-shirt. Yeah. So this is the thing, like it's not going to leave out anything. There's no escaping it. I know you guys all enough to say that you guys know that place where you keep like getting on the train and at some point you've gotten on the train and you're like, uh-oh, this time I got on the train and there's no getting off. And once you've gotten on the train and you realize there's no getting off, it opens up a whole other level of micro nuance to your practice. That literally the corrections or the advice or the practices or the thing or the move to do could be coming from any one of the bodies I just said and will be equally spiritual in nature. And in fact, I'm going to be tangenty for a minute. And in fact, that's some of the challenge of this practice, which is that at the quantum, you can see things very quickly, but the time it takes to catch up to the attainment or the metabolic process and integration of that seeing could be what you experience as 20 years. Not what is 20 years, because there is no time, but what you experience as 20 years. And in fact, because you experience it as 20 years, it will bring variables on board inside of you that will interact with that quantum seeing and incorporation that will likely hamper, or at a quantum pure level, not at all hamper, but will interact with the process. So I'm here to be with you in reality, in all its permutations and at all its levels, because that's what we're speaking to here, is the way reality has come to create itself into something that is too limited for real reality. And then to point to the thing that is real reality and to understand the dance between them. I forgot to get back to that piece. I mean, I think that's the one that we see the most in the world, which is that we have all of these, like, if you think of a plant, it's like, or water, if it can't go in a straight direction, it's going to like veer off in many side directions. And so I think one of the principal side directions, which has a million tributaries, is like, I'm going to go get engaged in 50,000 healing modalities. You know what I mean? And so what I find is that a lot of people come to me and they're like, I've been at this for 15 years and I'm now like a CBT master and I've taken 50 shamanic trainings and I could like train somebody in yoga, and they're like, but something still doesn't feel right. And it's always because the primary architecture of the double bind is still intact. And even if they have dealt with it externally, like resolve things with their parents, for example, or like in their marriage sometimes, or with their kids, or with their job, what we find is that once we dig underneath it, there's still this fruiting body to the double bind, that it's like you've cut it down lower, but you're still not at the origin place of it. And so as a result of it, it's still causing things to go sideways, and it's less visible. The most typical part of this that I speak about is what I call the lateral move. And so it's the idea that you're moving, but after like 50 of these moves over time, you're like, wait a second. Like I just did all these things, but it still feels like I'm kinda in the same place. And that's the lateral move. And what it's missing, you guys, is the innovation. This is so key. The difference between a non an or what I call an emergent or organic move and a lateral move is that the original or organic move is coming from a reality layer that is below the double bind. Almost everything we're sourcing is above it or within it, because it's a threshold, it's a false bottom. Right. You'll never fully remedy it. Right. And the point, you don't have to. And it will decrease in power in your system as your energy becomes more anchored outside of it. I think of it like, okay, this is how I think of it. Like if you have this big, long structure, long held structure in water, it's like the water keeps washing through it, and right, and eventually like the water creates maybe a hole in it, but the structure is still there. Over time the water will become stronger than the structure. I mean, the water was always stronger than the structure, but hell, that's a whole other conversation. So the water will wear away the solidity of the structure. Once there's a threshold where the water is in proportion more mass than the structure itself, you will see that the power of the double bind is almost invisible. It doesn't mean that it won't show up in your awareness and that it won't cause you to act or not act certain ways, but its influence will be infinitesimal in comparison. There was a talk that Dare and I did, like whatever, back when we did those couple of podcasts. And in one of them, we were talking about like the traversing through the woods and how like you never really get out of the cave or the woods. But like at some point, it's like it doesn't matter whether you get out of the cave in the woods because it's like you've transformed into something else entirely. And so, in that transformation into something else entirely, that thing can still exist, but it doesn't matter. It's like a stone instead of a boulder in your awareness. And the size of it may never have changed. It's your awareness and your perception that changes the size and the physics of your field's relationship to it. The energetic interior can change, but what will happen is you'll still go through the phases where there'll be more of something, less of another. It's never going to be like perfect. I mean, maybe there's going to be a phase where it feels really perfect, but that will die too, right? Because this is the nature of impermanence, is that we don't hold on to any of these things. But I think the bigger thing that you're pointing to that I want to say something about is this piece of the fact that our orientation is almost always still about a kind of like attainment or thing that you do or attribute that means you've gotten the thing. And we have to completely throw that out. Because listen, when I really got the thing, you guys would my life looked a mess. I wasn't that, like, my body wasn't that healthy. I didn't have any money. So like we can't be mistaking these things as measures of attainment or success. We have to change our orientation to the way movement is happening. And really, the measure I like to use is access to vitality. Because somewhere about that, that's what we're all really hungry for. Regardless of the conditions, we want to be able to meet those conditions with a high or mediocre or somewhere some access to vitality. We also want access to choice. And that is not the same thing as free will. So don't even mistake what I'm talking about as free will. You have to get rid of free will to actually get to true choice. Because free will is some sort of control-based weirdness that doesn't take into account the fact that like everything is a factor of 1,500 butterfly wings that you can't even see. So just throw that out. I mean, really, what you have to learn how to do is become an incredibly attuned dancer and understand the room that you're dancing in and the rules of the different layers of the dance. That's the kind of skill set that equips you with being able to do this thing with more accuracy. And then you don't really care whether you're getting it right. I was talking to somebody earlier today and we were talking about like fucking up. And I was saying that like we should have some sort of barometer for spiritual teachers where like the ones you want to follow are the ones who are like laughing their asses off when shit goes wrong when they're trying to be smart. Right. And I was talking about the other day, yesterday or something, when we were filming that video and the roofers were happening and like it was really loud and I was trying to say like the most serious thing. And then I was like cracking up and I tried to keep going and then I was cracking up again. And then I was like, let's include this in the video because this is kind of how it really is. Like you don't want to pursue the spiritual teacher who's got it all figured out Because the one who actually has it all figured out is laughing their asses off at how stupid the universe is. That's the anti-cult spiritual teacher. They don't care whether anybody follows them because they think the whole thing is a cosmic joke, and they're drop dead serious about the teachings. And somehow we've built this thing in our mind where we want the $100,000 teaching from the attained master who looks like they have all their shit together. And again, it's not that you can't learn something from those people. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying they'll teach you maybe a skill, but they won't accompany you through the whole journey. And really, you want the ingredients to accompany yourself through the journey because it's yourself you're left with. It's yourself you have in the middle of the night when shit goes wrong, or the day, or the afternoon. Yeah, or the morning, or when the cat wakes you up. I also should say, I'm not going to talk about it today because it's also a longer topic about what happens in the energy body when you have cultivated a certain degree of openness, vitality, and innocence, and then you get into an intimate space. I don't mean just sex, but a close space with a family member, a longtime friend, anybody who is still running a program of systemic oppression as their primary program. Because what will happen is your physics will start changing the longer you're with them. And it will be harder and harder to hold your own. That's a whole other talk. Please bookmark it so you guys remind me to give it. It's a really good thing to know. Because we tend to then blame ourselves. Why am I not holding my own? I don't have good boundaries. Like there's all sorts of things that come up, but there's a natural thing that's happening there with the physics that if we can see it, we can do better with moving with it. And I can talk about all kinds of ways to work with it if you're in that situation, including moving your awareness to different places within reality to hold your field. I'm going to say a little bit about fucking around and finding out, finally. So let's say that you've gotten to the place where you have more access to vitality. So the thing is, when you get to a certain point and you have more vitality on board and you go through the whole bullshit of like, I'm lonely, I'm forever going to be lonely, this path sucks. When you're done with that tantrum, which again might happen a lot of times, so don't think you're ever permanently done. Some people never finish that tantrum. Um, but anyway, when that has abated for a short time, what happens is you're left with a lot of vitality in a reality that is not built for vitality. And so that's when the fucking around and finding out happens, which is that now you get to basically start moving pieces around on the chessboard with skill, or at least you think you have skill. And so you start basically having some access to a wider field, its influence, its power, its movements. And at this point, your attunement to that wider field is not one field, but the movement of the many fields within the unified field. So I'm going to give you an example of this. Last night, yesterday I finished work and I left and I went to get a pedicure. And I got my pedicure and I sat there in the pedicure chair and I was trying to observe myself, which I have almost no ability to observe myself anymore. That is one of the things that has completely like gone for me, which is a very unfortunate loss. But I have no ability to observe myself because basically I am full-time just pulsating existence. And existence can't observe itself because it's just existing. So I have to kind of rely on things that will show me something. And I've developed skills around that, which I can talk about at some point if people ever want to know. Anyway, I'm sitting there in the pedicure chair and I'm just like, oh my God, I'm just existence. Like, this is interesting. I'm just existence. And I almost like text a few people to tell them this as if this is news to them. It's only news to me, by the way, because they've all heard it and they've all observed it because they can still observe. So then I leave there and I'm like all alone because I'm mostly all alone, except for being online. And so I go to get some dinner. I take myself out to this dinner and I leave there and I'm at the threshold of like a really long arc of being very unhappy. And I'm a very happy person. I mean, you guys can tell, right? Like I'm pretty joyful, but it's been a long arc, a lot, like a whole decade of being extremely unhappy with multiple permutations of extreme unhappiness. So I'm crying on the way home. I get home, I have my book I'm reading, I try to watch TV, none of that works. I finally turn off the light. And as usual, at 3:30 in the morning, I wake up. And I am just watching the dream body move, which is what happens. And I try to get in my body enough to be able to have some agency with the dream body and some dancing with it. So that happens. And I'm watching this whole piece of unhappiness. And this piece of unhappiness has stories to it, it has memories, it has flavors, it has a texture, all of it. And at some point, it's like over on the right. And at some point, like behind it and slightly to the left, there's another wave. And imagine these are all waves in the ocean, of which there's like thousands at the same time, even imperceptual initiations of waves. So I see this other wave, and as I see it, I'm like, huh. And I go towards it, and I'm like, oh, that other wave is just like full of infinite, like, possibilities, which is typical for me because that's what my system runs. But there's some dimension of this one that has something. And when I go from that back to the long arc of pain one, in a second, in a split second, I encounter what I speak about as a reversal. So a reversal has happened to me many times. And it can happen to you too, and it probably has happened to you, whether you recognize it or not. It's when you truly get to the no movement place and the end of a particular arc of a pattern. We almost never fully complete the reversal because we are not taught how to hold the tension or to recognize the movement of something towards its completion. So we either avoid it, adapt it, or rush it. And any three things of those will keep you from the completion. But what happened last night, because I have, there's a lot of practice, I just did what I do, which is I just left it. And in a second, the reversal happened. That other wave basically became the original wave. And I had a complete opening to all sorts of other things. And that went on for like another hour. And then I just fell asleep and had a nightmare, like a bad dream about somebody removing my liver. But anyway, that's a whole other story. So then I woke up this morning. And when I woke up this morning, it was like that old field was, of course, still here in residue, but it was not as dominant. So this is part of what happens in that fucking around and finding out is that like you become a curious investigator of phenomena even at its most micro level and from many, many different vantage points. And as long as you're not doing that investigation from a control variable, trying to solve your problem, trying to get to a better place, trying to remedy something, trying to be something, you will find that the field will show you many, many, many different movements that are always there. And then the next level is figuring out which of those you are following, which is yours to follow. All right, sending you guys all tons and tons and tons of love. Stay in your boat on the very rocky river. It's fine if it capsizes. You can get back in it.